On behalf of WIIS Austria, I want to thank you all for being with us tonight, especially to our speakers. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jessica Yellowhair, and I'm a WIIS board member and the moderator for tonight's panel discussion. For this session, we are collecting your questions for the panelists from our Zoom chat and the Q&A, but make sure you add an @ sign so we know to whom we forward the questions to. We're starting with me introducing our speakers, and we will then hear a lightning talk by Amy Herja, and then get right into the discussion with our speakers. Okay, I'd say let's start with the introduction of our lightning talk speaker. Amy's a second-year PhD student in the Peace Studies and International Development Department at the University of Bradford. As a feminist peace builder and sociologist, she is conducting a comparative analysis on the EU countries' national action plans for the 1325 resolution. Welcome, Amy. We also have Rania with us tonight. She's an award-winning journalist, mental health and human rights advocate. Currently, she's a public speaker and filmmaker, working with various organizations and media outlets, focusing on female empowerment, mental health, and refugee rights. Her first documentary, which was in cooperation with The Guardian, earned her 4 permanent international awards in 2017. Thank you for being with us tonight, Rania.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Melissa Mujanayi. She was deployed as Human Rights and Gender Advisor into the European Union training mission in Mali in 2019. She works as a desk officer for the She works as a desk officer for Africa in the Directorate for Security Policy at the Austrian Federal Ministry of Defense. Her focus is on the cooperation with African partner countries, as well as the whole of government coordination with security and development nexus. Thank you for joining us tonight, Melissa.
Thank you for having me.
We also have Edith Schlaffer with us. She founded the international nonprofit organization Women Without Borders in 2001. The organization focuses on building up the competences and confidences of women to affect positive social change in countries of crisis. Edith focuses on gender-based peace-building strategies that harness the strength of civil society and building a new security architecture from the bottom up. Welcome, Edith.
Pleasure.
Last but not least, we have Nadja Schmidt with us, the director and co-founder of the Austrian branch of ICAN. ICAN is the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, and this organization also won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. Before getting involved with ICAN, she worked in the Department of Disarmament, Arms Control, and Non-Proliferation at the Austrian Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome, Nadja.
Thanks for having me. Hi.
Okay, I say without further ado, I hand over to you, Amy, and you present your lightning talk.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Can you hear me fine? Okay, good. All right, so I will just jump in then and say thank you for inviting me to take part. I, of course, would have loved to meet you all in person, but it's wonderful to be here digitally. And as mentioned in the introductions, my name is Amy Herja, and I am a PhD researcher at the University of Bradford, researching remotely here in Berlin. And with this lightning talk, and as a precursor to this evening's wonderful panel, I'm sure, I will be talking about some trends that we're seeing in the Women, Peace and Security agenda, including some initial impressions from my own data collection phase of the research that I'm doing, and then focus on how civil society is a part of this vital peace work. And as a note, if you would like to be in touch, feel free to do so. I know that my contact information is being shared. So to begin then, and in sort of setting the scene, as we've noted, I think throughout the course of the conference today, since trends within the global peace and security climate remain ever changing, the WPS agenda, of course, has been adapted accordingly, staying interconnected to other UN policy matters. And in this current climate, it's safe to say that the original intended emphasis on women and peace, envisioned by so many with UN Security Council Resolution 1325, is now really an emphasis on women in security. Should this come as a surprise? Well, this agenda is situated within the UN Security Council, which does have its own narrow operational mandate. So maybe hopes placed in this landmark resolution have been falsely apportioned. Adding further to this complexity, initial visions for Resolution 1325 included a focus on demilitarization and disarmament. But by being situated within the security scene, with the UN's permanent 5 as major security players, emphasis is instead on increasing the number of women in the military, women's leadership in the armed forces, and, as we know, the protection of women in times of conflict. Again, not on women and peace here, but women in security and their protection as part of security. So fast forwarding to 20 years later, with this year's 20th anniversary on 1325, one of the 4 pillars for WPS, participation, particularly civil society participation, arguably the main impetus for 1325 being adopted in the first place, has been de-emphasized. With 1325's 10 subsequent resolutions, only 5 address women's rights and participation, and to limited degrees. All resolutions refer to women's protection, however. To reorient the discourse around 1325, a shift is needed out of this latent female victim narrative, and I would argue out of the women in security focus. But how can this be done, especially since this agenda is situated within the UN Security Council? Well, that is where my research comes in. I am looking at how countries' own national action plans, or NAPs, for the WPS agenda are being formulated and implemented, specifically in all European Union countries with such plans, of which there are 20. And to date, I have completed 95 interviews with a range of implementing actors. And what I've found, even within one region, is that, not surprisingly, not every country is the same. For starters, I've discovered that few maps for EU countries refer specifically to disarmament, and no plans reference nuclear disarmament. And while several make mention of women's participation in peace and civil society's participation in NAP processes, few specifically mention how women's participation will be planned for and who from civil society will be included. Why is this a problem? Well, without transparency, activities may not be planned for. External civil society organizations may not actually be brought in, and accountability needed for this agenda just may not exist. With so many EU countries, interviewees mentioned that their NAP exists just as a piece of paper, and that there's little to no political will to implement it, or that interest in the work varies depending on who is the focal point within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or equivalent at any given time. What makes matters worse is that due to the effects of COVID-19, several interviewees already mentioned potential budget cuts in the years to come, which will impact any WPS-related work for these ministries. One of the most striking findings from this interview phase so far has been the range in which civil society actors are actually engaged in this work at the national level. For many EU countries, which may be a surprise in circles such as these, few to no organizations exist that focus on women and peace. So when we as academics and practitioners always mention the need to include civil society in NAP processes, what if such organizations simply do not exist? What then? That's where I find the potential of cross-country and regional collaboration to be particularly important. Even in the EU, though, WPS coordination seems to be happening mainly on an ad hoc basis. That means that there are single persons, including lone NGOs, academics, even actors within ministries that are isolated in their monitoring and/or implementing work. What I hope to explore more is how external NGOs, even international organizations, can further bolster the work that is happening in country for these NAPs, and how point persons within the same ministry departments across the EU, so in ministries of foreign affairs, interiors, defense, etc., can more systematically share. And to wrap up here, I know that there is a lot to say and I could go on, but in thinking about questions for the future, a pressing one for me is, as the feminist peace scholar, how transformative and how participatory countries' work for WPS will be in the years to come. And how can we harness this potential for further regional collaboration, particularly in the EU? So some things for us to think about. And I thank you all very much. I'm so glad I could take part, and I look forward to this panel to follow.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was super interesting, and I'm really looking forward to your paper as soon as you release it. So please, please write us when you do so. We left Amy's contacts in the Zoom chat. You can contact her via Twitter or Instagram, or even write her an email if you have further questions to her. Okay, I'd say let's dive right into the discussion. Our first question for tonight goes to all of you. From your expertise or point of view, where does the implementation of the 1325 resolution stand today? Edith, do you want to start?
Actually, I would like to have a pass on that question and listen to you, because 1325 is not the key focus of our work, but of course we are connected with 1325 and supporting it. But I think it would be nice if somebody who's really working on the issue would frame it first, and then I can follow up and give examples from our work, how we are connected with 1325. Is this okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. Melissa, do you want to go on? Oh, I think Melissa has some technical issues. Melissa, can you hear me?
Yeah, my connection is absolutely not stable, so I didn't hear even the end of what Edith was saying. So could you repeat, please?
Yes, so Edith gives a pass on this question because her work is not completely focused on the resolution, but just a part of it. And she'd like to frame it afterwards and want to hear other speakers first.
Okay, and so it's my turn. That was the point.
Yeah.
Sorry. Technical difficulties. Well,
no worries.
Yeah, very interesting introduction, also especially for me. And there are some connection points which I might have the opportunity to speak of also. Just to mention that at the beginning, I'm here in a private capacity. So thank you for the invitation, not representing the Austrian Ministry of Defense, but also bringing in the experience I had working on that topic. And before we start, I think the most important thing here is to remind ourselves that this resolution 1325 has been a milestone from a feminist point of view. Today, and especially younger generations, which I still count myself in, we're kind of impatient and critical about the progress and what did we achieve in these 20 years, but let's not forget where this is coming from. And this impatience is totally understandable, but considering the WPS agenda, it is a permanent effort. It is a permanent fight, let's say. And at this moment, we're experiencing a huge backlash, a backlash that you might see at a high policy level, where you have some regressive gender policies of some countries of the Security Council, but also in the field when it comes to violations of human rights, when it comes to misogyny and that highly conflictive environment that we're facing in some regions of the world. So this is also referring to the lightning discourse before. Why are we more and more speaking about women and security and not women and peace? Because our environment is becoming more and more conflictive. And what has been, in my point of view, an asset of the WPS agenda was to go with time and to go with how the situation develops. So the last resolutions are just a reaction on what is happening in the world. And so in my point of view, I see the development and the implementation as a difficult work, of course, and yeah, as an effort that needs to be done like all the time.
Great input. Rania, do you want to go next on this question? Yeah.
Yes, gladly. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Amy. It's really interesting listening to all the input that you have provided. And I have to say, Melissa, that I'm one of the people who are very impatient when it comes to the implementations of the 1325 and where it stands and where we're going with it. I do realize that it's very hard and it takes time, and it's not and it is still a milestone when it started and where we are right now. But as Amy said, that it's still until this day there's still this kind of victimization image of the women, and women are mostly participating in either security, as it was mentioned before, or delivering the delivery of relief and recovery efforts, but they're not very included as much in the process of peace building. Some things that I always hope to see and I want to see from countries who are part of the, I mean, not only part of the Security Council, but in general, is there are things that they can do, not just to include women in the, as I said, in the prevention or in the security in the security part, but also they can do, for example, I would like to see that in the training activities for international peace operations, or I don't know, promoting including civil society by promoting local peace initiatives that are led by women, and very importantly, to include more women in the decision-making processes and positions, right? Preventing gender-based violence, which is a huge deal, of course, it's very important, and protecting women and girls is it's a very important part also of the work that should be done, but it shouldn't be focused, as I said, it shouldn't be focused on that. It should be, I mean, as someone who's coming from Syria, women have little to no role in the country that is war-torn right now, and in the process that it's in the country's peace-building process. Again, if we want to see something more sustainable, if we want to say the efforts to be more sustainable, we need to recognize women are equal in the process of not just, again, I'm just reiterating what I'm saying and what's been said before, not only in the security part or the delivery of relief, but also in all the other aspects, peace building, decision making, training, because you have to equip women also with the necessary tools to be part of the process that we're talking about, to be part of the peace building. So yeah, training them, recognizing the local peace institutions and initiatives, and also promoting them and supporting them. Yeah, that would be from my side. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Nadja, do you want to go next since Edith wants to be last?
Okay, thank you. I was now just thinking, I again have 3 different directions I could go now, because from the inputs of Amy and Rania now, it's like I count myself also to the very impatient women, but also disarmament activists. And there I have the connection to Amy's talk, where she like about the participation aspect of women, but also like the participation aspect of civil society, and that the resolution did not really focus that much on nuclear disarmament and it's like on a very like gendered approach also to disarmament. And I want to talk kind of like now about a success story, in my opinion, that somehow quite well implemented the spirit of the resolution 1325, which is, in my opinion, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, in short, the TPNW. Normally, I would now talk also a bit about like what is gender and nuclear weapons. I don't know if like all here are familiar with it, but maybe I leave it to questions like afterwards if someone wants to have some further talk about the specific gender aspect. But the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that was negotiated and adopted in 2017 is the first international treaty on nuclear weapons that addresses gender and nuclear weapons. And it has a specific reference on the role of women in general, but also on the disproportionate impact of women. And this is like something that is quite unprecedented in international weapon treaties, and especially in nuclear weapons treaties. I don't want to get like in the preamble and in the articles, but we as ICAN campaigners are all quite very proud of that this is in this treaty, and this comes somehow also from the participation in this group who made this treaty possible. So not only the civil society who campaigned for it and worked together with like-minded states, international organizations, and like a big platform and coalition of a lot of peace and disarmament organizations all over the world, but it was also the inclusion of these groups in the negotiations itself. So we had a civil society, a place there. We were included in all of the aspects that were negotiated, the diplomats there. And so there was quite a big part giving to the participation of civil society in general, but also to the female or women aspects in general, and in marginalized groups or indigenous groups and survivors and victims of these weapon systems. This is like for one part. So it's like really the treaty itself, I think, is like from its text very well and positive news, I would say, that now after 20 years of the resolution that we have now, we now have a treaty which took this into account, and it's written down thanks to broad participation. The second point I wanted to raise is that the negotiations of this treaty a lot of female leaders. Most of or many of the most active delegations there were led by women. For instance, Ireland and New Zealand, Philippines, South Africa or Sweden, and Thailand, they had like the head of the delegation, they were women, and the president of this negotiation conference was also women. And the civil society organizations that were included in these negotiations, there were a lot of women organizations, including the Women International League for Peace and Freedom, the oldest women peace organization in the world, who had like a very leading role, but also the leading figures like of ICAN itself, Beatrice Finn, and our speaker like Setsuko Thurlow, who is a survivor of Hiroshima, were very active voices in these negotiations. And that's like just as a comment also, because Amy asked what if such organizations within the nations simply do not exist? We had, ICAN is a campaign coalition with more than 500 organizations in 100 states that work together under this campaign coalition that ICAN is. And there are a lot of, they're just maybe small and not that well recognized. And yeah, so in my opinion, this TPNW is one of these landmark disarmament treaties, not only because it realizes our wish that it abolishes nuclear weapons, but also because it has like this gendered impact in there, and it's challenging a dominant gendered narrative that was built around the nuclear weapons field.
Thank you for that. Super interesting. Edith.
Yes, thank you so much. So I find everything you're saying incredibly interesting and helpful. And we started our organization actually in the same year as the resolution was started. And this was for us actually the first activity to jump on the campaign, you know, to make the resolution known, to disseminate it. This was all very exciting. And I would not say that I'm impatient 20 years afterwards, but I do see that what we are actually missing, and we live in an extremely divided world now, in a conflicted world, that resolutions go only so and so far, yeah? And the translation of the resolution into action, this piece is partly missing. I think all the players involved in it are working incredibly hard, but I think it's getting harder and harder to bring up these issues. And I totally underwrite that what you have said, Rania, that we should focus on the peace building part and not so much on the security piece. At the same time, and here I come in from where we as Women Without Borders position ourselves, without creating safe spaces and making sure that women have a say, a voice, and take part in the security arena, we will not go to that level of peace building. I mean, you coming from Syria, and you know, we know so much about conflict zones. We get all these voices. We hear that daily distressing politics. We see that safeguarding these spaces for women to act in these places, and I say women, I mean overall civil society is targeted in war zones, in crisis arenas, but usually women are particularly targeted and they carry the brunt of it. So I think that kind of positioning women in this so male-dominated security arena is incredibly important. Just take the example of Afghanistan. We started our organization partly after we had done a lot of research around the role of women in situations like in Afghanistan, where women in the underground, we learned from the women who really kept civil society alive during the times of the Taliban, for example. And these were acts of heroism, you know, keeping civil society alive, going underground as teachers, as nurses, as doctors, because they were not allowed to leave the houses and they did not know how long this terror regime would last. And where are we now? You know, the West was going to war with Afghanistan, with the Taliban regime. And now the West is sitting at the negotiation tables without including women. I mean, where is the outcry? You know, where is the peace building effort around this? So I think we really have now to step back and think together. And I think this is our global, the call for a global sisterhood. How can we support women in these crisis scenarios where, I mean, there might be a last opening, you know, if we stand up and support our sisters in Afghanistan, or take the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. I mean, in the Congo, we have this incredible initiative of the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Dr. Mukwege, who created with a group of women the City of Joy, supporting the women who were actually targeted as weapons of war, you know, in terms of horrific rapes. And I mean, he got this Nobel Peace Prize, and he built up this city, which is not only reconstructing the dignity and the health of the women, which is a long process, but also enhancing the leadership skills of these women so that they go back to their villages and become role models. But at the same time, his life is threatened. The whole project is threatened. I mean, you know, he has been on the global stage. The world looked up to him. He got all this, you know, shake hands with world leaders. And maybe the project will not go further. And the women are under incredible threat. And I do think that the peace building spirit is under threat. So I do think that we really need to pay more attention to actually what is going on right now and see how we can mobilize, how we can collectively support, you know, those who are under threat right now. I think this is for me, the responsibility of the resolution which, you know, I mean, yes, it's very important which country will adopt it, how do the NEPs work out, everything fine. This is a very important process. But in parallel, we need to have this parallel layer of taking action, mobilize the activists on the ground, in the halls of power, you know, at all levels of policy making, from grassroots to the top layers of decision making, and bringing the women together where they are, you know, under the trees in the respective geographies or at the negotiation tables, and really insert ourselves in the negotiation tables. I think this collective power, and there is a lot of global women power already around a variety of tables, but strategizing and thinking of how to create maybe examples of successful implementations, for me, that would be highly gratifying, and I think it is so needed. So this is my suggestion and how I look at it at the moment. So we should not be too drawn into the bureaucratic processes, which again, I don't undervalue. They are extremely important. We need all the frameworks, but at the same time, we live in an era of urgency. And I think particularly now in the context of COVID, every day counts.
Yeah, totally agree. I just want to mention that we want to keep this discussion as dynamic as possible. So if you have the urge to react to one of the speakers, please do so. For example, Edith raised some important points. If anyone wants to add something to that. If not, I just go on with the next question.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. Edith was making a bit the connection already to what I was going to say. I fully do understand that point of view, that which is very common to speak about, that over securitization, militarization of the discourse. Yes, but I also do think that it's quite dangerous or not very productive to do that kind of dissociation, differentiation between the security sector on one hand and peacekeeping and peace building on the other, especially when we're coming to the context of the United Nations and those troops that are deployed for exactly peace building or peacekeeping, depending on the situation. So differentiations like this are not kind of productive for the effort as a whole, because what, for example, the Austrian armed forces or other stakeholders are trying to do in terms of security forces is making them as responsible, as reliable, as respecting human rights as much as possible, as inclusive, including females also within the armed forces that we are training, for example, in the mission in Mali. It is making sure that the armed forces are like the image of the population, representing the population and protecting the population. So to completely differentiate and like giving the impression that peace building and peacekeeping efforts can only come from civilian grassroots activism is not taking into account the efforts that could be made in other sectors or on other policy levels.
Melissa, I totally agree with you. And I think there's no competition between the various efforts. Not at all. You know, peace building efforts and bringing the female perspective and include, you know, females in these processes is extremely important, you know. And but at the same time, I think that civil society players also have a role. Can you hear me? Yes. Civil society also does have a role to understand and to support these processes. And I think, I don't know who said it in the first statements, that training, that building the competence and the confidence of women on the ground and also of supportive men within the civil society is, I think, the way forward, so that we all work together on this. I think that peace building operations don't work in isolation from civil society actors. So I think this is what I would call a whole of society approach. And the whole of society approach starts at the grassroots level. I think this is incredibly important because this is where the success happens and this is where the failures happen. I'll give you an example. I mean, definitely we as Women Without Borders, we are very engaged in bringing women, particularly women, into the security arena. So we focus on the threat of violent extremism and try to engage particularly mothers of adolescents and young adult children, or half grown ups, in very turbulent times of adolescence. We bring them together. We created a model, an educational model. We call it the Mother Schools Parenting for Peace. So I think that starting there, using educational skills at the grassroots. So this is an empowerment tool which we should not undervalue. And this helps, to build up all the other, and then to understand, to support all the other processes. I think peace building is a very broad, includes a very broad avenues and competences, and it is something that I would say must be supported from various layers of society. And I think enhancing the support at the grassroots level, translated into an understanding where it actually is a daily reality and helps, the survival and the overall living conditions and peaceful conditions at the grassroots is of utmost importance, I guess. But I think it doesn't exclude anything, I think it's a very holistic approach.
Yeah, exactly. In order not to hinder cooperation and to go in
Exactly.
with prejudices that are not helping our cause.
Exactly.
That's exactly my point, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You already mentioned some sort of approach or step to move the agenda forward, like the side approach that you mentioned. This one can be seen as a step to get the agenda forward. Rania, Nadja, what do you think? What kind of steps can be taken to move the agenda forward? Maybe Rania, you want to start?
I actually heard basically 3 words of what you said. Rania, Nadja, do you want to, so do you mind please saying it again?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
It is sad that the whole society approach that you mentioned is some sort of step or actually a method to move the agenda forward, or the resolution. That's also what I think from my perspective. But what do you think? What kind of steps can be taken to move the agenda forward?
Well, that's very important, and I hope I can give. I mean, in my opinion, I would say that in order to make sure that it's working in the best way possible, and to make sure that everyone is included in it and no one is being excluded, whether it's civil society, whether it's women. I mean, by civil society it's not only women, of course, or women, or if it's the security part, or if it's the peace building part, or the peace protecting part, or disarmament. I think it's just, for me, it's the same points that I've mentioned before, in order to make sure everyone is included, and inclusivity is very important, is very present, right? you need to, it's not only about quotas, it's not only about who's doing what and how many women are doing what. You have to make sure that first, these women are included. Second, you make sure that they know what they're doing. You know, that's why I mentioned the training part before. Thirdly, to make sure that there's actual cooperation. There's not just one part of the deal is being done, but also the other parts. That's how I see it. That's how I see it. Again, I'm by no means the expert here. It's just that I'm giving it from a point of view of an activist and how I would see the agenda being working in the best way possible. And I know that people who are working with the UN, as whether they're part of the whichever organ of the UN is, they're gonna have a different priority as in how the implementation could come to work. But for me, and from someone who is considering as a civilian who's just part of the civil society and is doing their work is as an activist, this is how I would see it moving forward. But I probably other people would not see the prioritization would go the same way. But in a nutshell, it would be just the best way is to cooperate, you know, and not to exclude one part because something else is more important or something else is more urgent. And I do agree, a lot of stuff are urgent right now. You know, disarmament it's urgent, protecting women, gender-based violence, all that is very important right now. But that doesn't mean that the other aspects should be neglected. Yeah, I think that in my opinion, that's how I see it. I don't know what about the others. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I just want to say 2 sentences. I absolutely agree. You know, it's there are always competing issues and there are priorities and one has to focus and one has to strategize. At the same time, now, particularly in the era of COVID, I think, women are in such a difficult situation, unheard and unseen of, you know, I think this is such a huge backlash, and Guterres has named the problem, you know, that the silent pandemic is gender-based violence. So under these conditions, how can the majority of women, and those are heartbreaking numbers we learn now day by day, the women who are affected, how can they be part of the process, you know, of the process of peace building where there is no peace in their own home? You know, peace starts at home. This is the initial safe space. And there is there's obviously no mechanism in place. No, I mean, no global, no local, no, you know, there are not the precautions taking place to safeguard these women and protect these women and find ways, you know, out of this humanitarian crisis. This is a huge violation of human rights. This is not only about women's rights. It's a stain on our humanity to see what is going on right now. So I think, in my opinion, this is a priority now to find solutions in this situation so that these women can again live in a situation of a peaceful surrounding, and from there they can activate their resources and become part of networks and, you know, go into the right direction. And I think this is what is, for me, really much needed, you know, to find, move forward in effective peace-building strategies. And I think this is already a peace-building strategy to find ways to solve this huge crisis which is affecting women right now at the very moment.
And sorry, I would just like to answer that. And I absolutely agree with you, Edith. I think it's of course, there are urgencies, there are urgent matters that need to be attended to, but at the same time, we need to, I think, keep in mind that the risk that we are taking by if the only time that we're talking about women's role and what we're doing to women and what 1325 is doing now is by protecting them or talking about violence that is that's happening against women, we are risking showing the women as only victims, which is not true. I mean, it's absolutely right. It's a fact. Women do suffer, are the subject of violence more than, yeah, I would more or less more than I mean, at least domestic violence. But there is the point was that not to neglect something over because of something else. But at the same time, I definitely agree with you. It is a very urgent matter. It is something that you need to empower women. You need to make sure that they're safe before you tell them to contribute to anything. That's it, sorry.
Nadja, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I would like to follow up on Rania's suggestions that, in my opinion, the focus on the question of representation of women and also the women's role or also victimization is needs to have an additional very important perspective, in my opinion, which is having a different discourse and establishing feminist views or feminist security concepts, or like different security concepts, and talking about definitions of peace and war and power structures, to create new and other forums where also the results can look differently. Again, I'm not an expert in like conflict resolutions, but again, disarmament, that's what the humanitarian initiative did, is the discourse around certain weapons or the militarized or masculine militarization aspect is you give power to a weapon. When you have a nuclear weapon and you're strong, you're male, you have power, and then you are secure. On the other hand, people, most of like a peace movement or disarmament advocates, they are perceived as weak and irrational, and most of the time equals a feminine approach or female approach. And this doesn't give that much room for maneuver. But instead, like starting from a viewpoint saying these are gendered and power problems and gender relations that we need to look at, how different discourses, but also the forums around it that are responsible for negotiating treaties or deciding are what the structures around there, and build up other ones or start from a different point to not only have a better representation, but also to be on a new track, kind of like to realize really like new solutions for long-lasting problems. I don't know if this was now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we heard some impacts on how we can move the agenda forward, and you all work in some sort of organization or in your own ways as an activist towards these goals. But when you work towards these goals, you always have to overcome hurdles. What are the biggest hurdles you have to overcome in your work field? Melissa?
Thank you, Jessica. I just wanted to add something about the history of the WPS agenda concerning the emphasis there are in there. So when you look at it, not only you have that starting point where there were ideas of female participation in peace processes. Then you had, like, let's call it a second wave, where it was more about like the protection of women's rights and women's bodies. Now you in the last times you had a bigger focus on women's agency, and with that focus on women's agency coming to a point where you include them in prevention of violent extremism and terrorism and so on. So to say something positive, there is this development within the agenda where you're not only victimizing women, but you're giving them this agency that they have, and seeing them from another perspective. So there has been some progress on that side. Just to mention that we're not still in this ideology of women are victims, and especially victims of sexual violence and so on. This is one part, but since then, for sure, the agenda has evolved. And coming to your question about the hurdles, my personal one, which I also think is very much where the whole WPS agenda stands, is to be caught between that idealism and the realism. When in international relations and in international politics, I mean, the actors that are around, they have interests, and they're acting according to those interests. And sometimes I find it difficult to maneuver in this kind of realm without losing my ideals. For example, when you want to bring forward the WPS agenda, sometimes you might be in a situation where you use instrumental or simplistic arguments to, like, say that, yeah, female brings something to the table, yeah? For example, when there's always been this discourse when you talk about prevention of violent extremism and terrorism, to talk about operational effectiveness and what women can bring in the security sector in terms of intelligence gathering. So what's the added value of women? And on the other side, you hear a lot, which I fully have to underline, that these are arguments that shouldn't be necessary because nobody's asking what men bring to the table and so on. So you have these right-based like arguments, which would just be, of course, women should participate in the security sector. Of course, they should participate in peace building because it's their human right and they're just 50% of the population. But sometimes these arguments don't work. And then you're in what I call realpolitik, where you should like bring arguments that are related to the interests of the actors in order to bring your agenda forward. And this is so a bit the big hurdle that I see for all of us. Of course, all the criticisms with the agenda are like understandable. Also from, for example, from a post-colonial or decolonial criticism perspective, you could say like all the topics that are within the WPS agenda, who is setting the agenda? Who interests, whose topics are these? Are these like women from the global south that are really concerned that are setting these topics, or are these women from industrial countries from the West? Yes, this is all like valuable criticism, but this is where you have sometimes to maneuver between idealism and realism, in my point of view.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Ada, what kind of experience do you have with those? Do you feel the same struggles?
I think we work in our main work currently is focused on preventing violent extremism and working with women at the grassroots level, that they become stakeholders in this prevention space, which I think is a huge jump forward. And this is not the question, whether it is, what we have seen is so much of hard power has not worked. Hard power is mainly exercised by male-dominated actors and male-dominated approaches, from military forces to law enforcement. But within law enforcement, of course, a lot has changed as well through the inclusion of and participation of women. But I think that the question, why women in security and peace, is not the question anymore at all. The question is the how. How do we bring something to the table that is different? Maybe you framed it as a feminist discourse, how we translate our approaches into action, into a new reality, without being in denial of the realities on the ground, which are often not very welcoming. So I think that the question of how is the most important one, and bringing the issue to the table means that we bring the issue to the table in a physical form, that women's representation is safeguarded. Currently, we work across the Western Balkans. We work in places like Bangladesh. We work in very different settings. And what is a common experience is that women are not visible. They're not really participants in these processes, which is a big mistake. So they are, even in the municipalities, it is a very male-dominated discourse. We have, I think it was mentioned in the lightning speech, or one of the speakers later mentioned it, and I think that is very important, the lack of female-led organizations. So we often have to rely on individuals at the grassroots, individuals in the ministries. I think that capacity building needs to have a stronger gendered component, that actually women as a collective can act as change makers in these various scenarios. An individual can only go so and so far, but I think we need strong collectives, women-led organizations who are also trained and empowered to do the right thing. It's not enough, and we see this in realpolitik. Look at the global level, where we have female actors, and where's the difference? So I do think that the women who will make changes in this critical spaces need also the respective training and empowerment and the right skills and the right spirit to contribute in a valuable way. And the other thing is, of course, the empowerment of the male counterparts, the still overwhelming male counterparts. They need to, if we want to train women as peace allies, as security allies, we also have to see how we break into the male domain, so that we have the right support on the other, understanding the support vis-a-vis the female space, the upcoming female talent pool, I would say. So strengthening the female talent pool is the one thing, but actually translating these ideas, the mission, the strategies is another thing, and building these bridges. This is I would call it an empowering dialogue on both ends.
Nadja, what are the biggest hurdles you had to overcome in your work?
I wouldn't add actually much of over what has been already said, especially what Edith was talking about. So my work is mostly with non-governmental organizations. I also do freelancing as a journalist, and what the biggest hurdle is the overwhelming I don't know how to put it in the best words possible, so it doesn't sound very wrong. Lack of female representation, lack of female existence in my sphere. It's not, and Edith was talking about soft power and hard power, strong power. I don't know what how it was, but dealing with your whether it's your boss or whether it's the leader of the organization or whatever it is, could be really hard, because the way that they see it is the way that they see the process that should good work, whether it's a project, whether it's a video for advocacy or whatever. It could be really hard. It could be really difficult for us to get to a certain point where we agree, because first, I would say also age is different. I consider myself quite young in the field, and there's all mostly over 45, and it's really hard with me to try to get to a common agreement on what we should do, or how should we follow, which kind of process we should follow, which kind of method, technique. That would be the biggest hurdle that I have to overcome basically every single day in my work, just to try to convince a male boss who is over 45 that maybe we should follow a different path, maybe we should do it in a different way and see how that goes. Lack of women in the, lack of women who have their own organizations, that also could be very discouraging sometimes. But it's changing. It's a changing process, and I think it's that would change. That it all will change very soon, hopefully sooner than I could imagine. But it's quite challenging to deal with that every day.
Yes, I can imagine, and I think some of us have these kinds of bosses. Nadja, what were your biggest hurdles in your work field?
Well, I must say our boss and our head, Beatrice Quinn, is a woman. So in this respect, there was a not so difficult situation in the whole campaign. But the most challenging is not only the goal of our campaign, but that it's like this goal has inherently this gender approach, and the question of who can participate in questions, or in this specific regard, nuclear questions. And then the criticism that you face that the peace movement that established a treaty that abolishes nuclear weapons is a treaty that is dangerous, and that is like endangering the existing system, and by that, like, meaning, like, in brackets, inherently you are challenging the existing system, like the male-dominated force. And of course, you all have a very weak and idealistic and feminine approach, and of course, because there are so many women involved. So in me personally, whenever I'm vetted, it depends. So in which forest, but sometimes it's like the first question, what brings a young woman like you are in engaging in this topic, because it must be quite hard. And I don't like this first question because I'm invited there as a speaker on talking about the nuclear disarmament and abolishment of nuclear weapons, and I don't want to be brought into like, why is it that you're here? Well, I'm here, and of course I'm a woman, and my way to get there is of course that I have like that I'm a supporter of another discourse, and that I'm a proponent of a gender discourse and of a feminist agenda. And maybe that was like also in the forefront, the attractiveness of being part of this process and being part of ICAN. And we just now see it like also like challenging, because right now I just saw some Twitter notifications right now, because I guess our director Beatrice, she's now very much like criticizing also certain administrations and governments in the world. And right now there is like this big push by the United States against the treaty, the TPNW, because we hope that tomorrow or within the next days it will enter into force, or we'll get a 50th ratification that we can enter into force. And suddenly there is like a whole group of themselves like powerful people, male leaders, that are bringing up arguments that are completely, how do you say, not even getting into a discussion of like what the treaty is, why it exists, but just following their own path of how viewing those things, and that this is not a serious thing. But still, when a Trump administration sends out diplomatic depeches to all major countries to tell them to get off this treaty and to not ratify it because it's a pretty dangerous situation, I would say. But well, we established the discourse in getting like, let us talk about this weapon itself, if it's powerful. And so it's like the difficulty, not that much the question of how to get the representation, because we in our field, I think there is a lot of happening and a lot of possibilities to engage. But the problem is like, who is taken serious, and on which basis do you lead a discourse? And not just a discourse like it's not, in our case, it's not a theoretical discourse, but it's a factual. We have a treaty and we are developing international humanitarian law, and the United Nations did something in this respect. So we are talking about some factual things that exist, but which are put from other sides into wrong discourse.
Thank you for your input. We should slowly, surely get to the Q&A of our discussion. And we already have some questions. One question from the chat goes to Nadja, and it says, you mentioned that it's necessary to introduce feminist concepts in security policy in order to change its discourse. Other than human security, can you maybe give a couple of examples? And also, how do you assess Swedish feminist foreign policy, or French or Mexican for that matter? Are they on the right track in terms of streamlining the feminist approach into all areas of foreign policy? You're muted.
Thank you. Well, that's a lot of topics to touch upon, but feminist concepts in terms of security policy, I really need to say it's like human security is really the core of it. And I mean, it didn't really start as a feminist concept, but it's really included or incorporated in this like feminist agenda, that security needs a different definition, not about like security. That security is like the title of like, how do you say, less arms, more peace, is like security. Is this defined by the type of weapons and the amount of weapons do you have? Or is security defined in a different way? And right nowadays, I think it's quite a lot of developments that bring global politicians and institutions into the direction that security needs to be redefined, also like in face of COVID-19 and various conflicts, but also with regard to the environmental and climate change crisis that we have in health. That asking like, isn't like the core of security, the human security, that people can live in security, and what do we need for it? Firsthand, we need education, we need a health system with a social system and an environment that is not affected. And if you start from this definition of security, I guess the policy implementation necessities, they look completely different. So yeah, I really wanted to focus on this human security concept and how, what if like Sweden are on the right track. I would say, I mean, there are a lot of things to criticize in there, but at least they have a feminist foreign policy agenda. So they decided to streamline their streamline their foreign policy according to feminist principles and approaches, and establish some gender mainstream and all that. And I would really see more governance jumping on this track of really included this perspective of a feminist foreign policy in their foreign policies.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I have another question to all of you. So how do you think, how can young and older generations of women work together to support each other? Edith, you maybe want to start with this one? You're muted, Edith.
Mute? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. We have in our organization, in our programs, and in our work, and particularly in our educational strategies, we have a strong focus on intergenerational work. So if we empower women, if we work on the potential of women, if we build up female capacity, focus on female leadership, which is prerequisite for feminist, the execution of feminist policy. We need strong leadership capacities. If we do all of that, I think we're going into the right direction, and not only for ourselves and for the inclusion of women and for the participatory processes, but also serving as role models for the younger generation, for the upcoming young girls and boys. I think this is incredibly important that they get the right perspective, that the older generation, the more experienced generation paves the way, and with all the means that are available, and push into the right direction and support this leadership capacity for themselves to open doors, which maybe the younger generation is not yet placed because of they don't have maybe the access to the resources that are needed. But I think a huge responsibility lies with adult generation, and for this reason we absolutely focus on this empowerment component and the responsibility of particularly parents, you know, the mothers and the fathers, and they play critical roles in the lives of their children. They are more or less the first school, and building up this this pool of role models, I think, is a very important process. This is not either or. I think this work has to go hand in hand, you know, with old and young. This is a daily dialogue, a dialogue in action.
Thank you for this. We have another question. Melissa, this one is for you. Feminist security concepts were mentioned by a number of all of you, but what would a feminist foreign and security policy look like in Austria?
I like that question.
You're muted.
Yeah, tough question, I must say. There might be some reason why I'm not in politics. Exactly one is that one. I'm not sure if I can answer that question as such. One aspect is for sure to really implement that definition of security as human security. I think that is one crucial point with it. Where you have, I'm referring especially to that definition where you have these 7 aspects of security from this UNDP report, talking about economic security, human food security, health security, environmental security, personal, community, and political security. With that definition of security, you have another way of working together on a governmental level. You have that whole of government approach, and you might be more effective in the politics or the policies that you're developing. And this is also one crucial point with feminism, with the women and with the WPS agenda, that it's a cross-cutting issue. And to see it as a cross-cutting issue in which everybody has its role to play in order to make the world a more safe and secure and at the end peaceful place, that is what needs to be done actually. I'm always cautious with that labeling like feminist foreign policy or so. These are, yeah, what is behind should be seen critical, and what is counting are the action that are behind it. So the only thing that I would see as necessary as such is to make sure that women, peace and security, that feminism art is treated as a cross-cutting issue that should be relevant in all policies. And therefore, I'm sure we get to, let's say, better results or better quality of policy, and then better quality of living and more peaceful societies.
Nadja, you wanted to say something to this?
Now to the as a replica to Melissa, or the question of like how the Austrian foreign policy should look like?
Both.
Well, how the Austrian foreign policy or general should look, yeah, it's also a difficult question, like in the factual things, because I'm just looking at nuclear policy and disarmament and weapons of mass destruction disarmament treaties. And there I must say, I think the Austrians have realized like all the things that feminist foreign policy asks for. So it's like more demilitarized view on security itself through supporting multilateral processes. And as being a neutral country, we're not part of NATO, so Austria this doesn't really need to discuss like the military aspects of, for instance, NATO, so this falls away as well. But definitely building up a system that is more inclusive and that brings more justice, but also cooperation to all societal groups that in foreign policy or in general, like security processes. I think there are still some things that Austria should achieve, and generally, whenever I'm invited like as a speaker and I'm as an ICAN campaigner and representative in other countries than Austria, I always say, if one wants to support kind of feminist approach or a gendered perspective on also nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction, and in order to fully implement, going back to resolution 1325, then I have clearly 3 points that I need to mention, and one is that a country needs to address specifically the specific input nuclear weapons have on women and girls, and they need to ensure full representation of women in the weapons negotiations, which is, I think, much more an issue with countries, I guess, that are strongly militarized, because, for instance, in the TPNW negotiations, I think the major military powers did not take place. So maybe this has also an effect in the composition of delegations. But countries like Costa Rica that have clearly very peaceful standards and peaceful definitions in their foreign policy and security policies, there's a lot of space for women. And the last point I really need to see as an ICANer, a country that wants to fulfill feminist policy and also the resolution 1325 needs to sign and ratify the TPNW.
Okay, thank you for this one. Just a quick note that Rania had to leave earlier because of an emergency. But some questions on policy making or feminist policy making in Austria is so interesting for you. Maybe Ada, you want to step in on this one. You're muted again. Hold up.
Yes, does it work now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Austria does have a role to play, and Austria has for a long time and still is known, has been known and is still known as a neutral country, as a place for dialogue, and to revive this this asset, I think, and bring in new dimensions, provide a platform, a global platform for female negotiations, female peacemakers, make unlikely dialogues happen in a safe environment. I think this would be a huge step forward and would be something, you know, an opportunity to share the experiences of women from conflict zones, women from all over the world. So to brainstorm, share potential solutions, work on various solutions, come up with manifestos. I think this kind of space is very much needed. It's missing on the global level, and it would kind of connect local policymakers, with global policymakers. I think a huge opportunity, providing a lot of insights, very effective in having dialogues which are maybe kind of out of the box. I would advocate for something like that, and this would also be a good place to further the implementation of the resolution. So bring the stakeholders together and create these opportunities for exchange. I think this is a role Austria could play in advancing the feminist dream.
Thank you for this one. So in conclusion, we can say that the resolution or feminism itself came a long way, but although it's still so much more to do, and I just think we have to keep on pushing this agenda and women forward so we're there where we want to be. So thank you all for this interesting talk. And after all that we've discussed and heard today, there's one final question I have for you. Actually, it's not kind of a question, but more something that comes into your mind when you think of women, peace, and security. Like, what is the first word or some sort of catchphrase that comes into your mind when you think of women, peace, and security? Nadja. Don't think about it too long. It's something that just pops up.
No, it was in my head. There were just certain women in my head. It was Bertha von Suttner, it was Beatrice Finn, it was Angela Kane, and Setsuko Thurlow as a survivor of Hiroshima. It was not it just names, nothing. Yeah, nothing else. Those names came up.
The names are important. Melissa, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of women, peace, and security?
Well, actually, there wasn't any word coming up. It's just that when somebody says it or when I think of it, it seems right. It seems right, it seems natural and logical for me. As long as we are at the point that like women in security sector or women as activists or women as active players in international relations are something like that make people curious and exotic and exciting, there's something wrong within our society. The way we should think about it should be like, yeah, these things come together. Females are part of society, females are active actors, and if we want to make the world a more secure and peaceful place, of course, they play a big role, so yeah.
Yes, totally agree. Edith, what's your first input or the first thing that comes to your mind?
Normalizing normalizing something that is out of balance. So bringing something into balance. It is healing our societies. It is, for me, it would be a ray on the horizon in the current difficult times. It would be a journey which we travel with joy and hope.
Amy, since we started with you, I think it's a good wrap up to end with you too. So, what's the first thing that pops into your mind when you think of women, peace, and security? And your research topic does not count.
Yeah, I mean, of course, for me, it's always been about participation. I know that I use the word often in my remarks, but have an agenda that isn't just, policy driven and exists within and for ministries, for UN and UN related bodies, but rather something that can be embraced and valued and supported on the ground, in the field, at the national, at the community levels, being able to see an agenda that really was originated by the people and is for the people now moving forward. That's how I see it, participation, for sure.
Wonderful words. Yeah, thank you all for this interesting talk and discussion. And thank you so much for taking your time and being with us tonight. After the conference, we are working on an outline paper, and we will post that on our website. Of course, if you're interested, you can also write us an email and we forward it to you. You can also follow us on social media for more information. And of course, there's always the opportunity to become a WIIS member in case you want to get actively involved and participate. Okay, on this note, thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.